Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from London by former Iranian diplomat Mehrdad Khonsari. We also have Iranian political specialist Massoumeh Torfeh, who's a researcher at the London School of Economics. And in Washington, D.C., James Phillips. He's a senior research fellow for Middle Eastern Affairs at the Heritage Foundation. I thank you all for joining us. Mehrdad Khonsari, let me begin with you. The Europeans are bending to try to preserve this Iran deal. Trump has said he's going to rip it up. There's 2 months to go. Is this a good idea, trying to amend the deal and come up with a new one?
Well, I think that wanting to improve the deal is certainly a proposition that can be advanced, but it's how you try to improve the deal by changing the goalposts unilaterally, issuing ultimatums, or providing incentives so that this agreement that was achieved peacefully can be sort of amended in a peaceful fashion that is to the advantage of everyone. We have a bit of unorthodox American diplomacy. In the one sense, they issue ultimatums for wanting to renegotiate an already negotiated deal with Iran, and they issue ultimatums to places like North Korea for not negotiating. So I think this is an issue that has to be worked out by them, but I believe that there is room for further negotiation with Iran to resolve many other outstanding issues, but certainly issuing ultimatums and unilaterally pulling out does not seem to me to be a very sound and very, sort of a hopeful sign.
Okay, James Phillips, so changing the goalposts unilaterally, and once again the reminder that this was a peacefully achieved deal. Is Trump being reckless with something that's good? It ain't broke. Why try to fiddle with it?
Well, I would argue that the goalposts remain the same, preventing Iran from ever attaining a nuclear weapon. And I think in the course of negotiations, the Obama administration stepped away from those goalposts and decided to allow Iran not only to keep its illegitimate nuclear facilities and legitimizing them, allowing Iran to keep them operating in some instances, that the Obama administration moved the goalposts to make it easier to attain an agreement it knew it could not get congressional approval for, so it did an end run around Congress, and that has allowed the Trump administration to come back and say, this is just an executive agreement, we don't agree with it, we need to amend it to make it stronger, or we'll walk away from it. So I would argue that by warning that it will walk away from the agreement, the Trump administration has left the door open for saving the previous agreement through a follow-on or amendment agreement, amending agreement.
Okay, Massoumeh Torfeh, we've heard Trump reportedly telling Benjamin Netanyahu last week that he will not show any flexibility in renegotiating the Iran nuclear deal with European powers. When you hear that, what does it tell you?
Well, the point is that this JCPOA, as it's known, is not up for negotiation. That's something that the Americans are forgetting. I mean, mainly Donald Trump, but also Nikki Haley, the US ambassador at UN, and Mr. Mike Pence, the vice president, as well as Mr. Netanyahu. This particular agreement is not up for negotiation. What Iran is claiming, and the Deputy Foreign Minister of Iran said at Chatham House last week, was that, we're open to negotiations, but this particular JCPOA has to be honored first, and then we open up for other negotiations. And I think that makes sense because Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Trump may be in a hurry to change or to create an appendix to the present agreement, but this is not part of what has been accepted. And also, the terms that Mr. Trump wants are terms which are outside JCPOA, namely the ballistic missiles and also some of more close-up checks on Iran. Iran claims that there has been 9 times the checks by IAEA, and it has honored its agreement, and so the other side should. And also Iran says it's blocking business, it's blocking trade, which is damaging for everyone.
Right.
And one more point I would say here, and that is to do with the fact that Mr. Trump may be saying all these things about his worries about nuclear, but at the same time, according to Washington Post, he's signing a deal with Saudi Arabia for selling them multi-billion-dollar nuclear, civil nuclear, but it's there. So we can see that it's a dual game, and it's not correct.
Okay, James, let me ask you: have the Iranians, in your opinion, cheated on the deal at all?
They have twice violated the restrictions on heavy water, and they went over those. It was a technical violation. The Obama administration chose to turn a blind eye to it. They also have been caught trying to buy illicitly dual-use nuclear technology in Germany. That brings to mind the question of why they are still doing that, if they are still maintaining their commitments under the agreement.
Okay, so Mehrdad, has there been enough evidence in the behavior of the Iranians to suggest that they can't be trusted to adhere to the conditions and the terms of the deal long term?
No, I don't believe so. And I think that whilst, those technical violations may have taken place, but they were certainly not very serious, and not serious enough, at least for the IAEA to want to correspond with that kind of a viewpoint. Iran has stuck to its part, and I believe that irrespective of what ultimatum President Trump issues or what he does, and if he walks away, so long as Iran sticks to the provisions of the JCPOA, I don't believe that the other parties who are co-signatories to this will back away from it. Now, the point is that this will increase tensions and will not help remove the tensions that Iran so badly needs to remove. Now, sadly, Iran is in a desperate situation in the sense that it does not have many options. And the United States, I believe, is trying to take advantage of that, having itself reneged on implementing the removal of sanctions to the fullest, as promised by the Obama administration, not the Trump administration. The money does not go into Iran. Banking restrictions and control of banking transactions with Iran have all remained in place, irrespective of the provisions of JCPOA.
But hold on, Mehrdad. What happened to the $500 billion that they were supposed to have made from the deal that got freed up? They're doing business with the Europeans, which puts the Europeans, I guess, in a slightly
First of all, there is no $500 billion. There were talk of any amount of Iranian reserves held in foreign banks, which could have amounted maximum to 150 billion, which was in reality the amount that was available to Iran was far less than that. But that was Iran's own money, which is part of the reserves it holds. The Saudi Arabians, for example, as Ms. Torfeh was referring to, they have reserves of 600 billion, or the UAE, a small country, has reserves of several $100 billion. So that is not something to persecute Iran over. That is their own money from the sale of oil that had accumulated and to which they had no access.
Let me develop that a little bit.
Funding for Iranian projects has not happened.
Okay, so let me develop that a bit further and take it to Massoumeh. Massoumeh, there's a political argument made here, away from the technicalities of ballistic missiles and nuclear energy and so forth. The political argument has been that since the Obama administration signed the deal with the Iranian government, the Obama administration was naive to the fact that Iran has been conducting empire building in the region, whether it's supporting Assad in Syria, whether it's what's going on in Lebanon and Yemen and so forth. And that is at the heart of Trump's fears. That's at the heart of Netanyahu's fears and others. Would you accept that that argument is perhaps even half right?
Yes, if the contents of the argument were convincing. But unfortunately, they are not coming up with any solid points that could be acceptable. The points that they are raising about ballistic missiles or Iran's actions in Syria, these cannot stand up to argument really, because as we see, there are a lot of different countries involved in Syria. It's not just Iran that's involved in Syria. Many of the European countries, the United States, Saudi Arabia, everyone is involved in Syria. So, okay, negotiations can take place with Iran over its actions in Syria. It could even be reprimanded maybe for some actions. But Iran claims that it is there on the invitation of the Syrian government. Now, the other thing is the ballistic missiles. Ballistic missiles, Iran claims it needs because of the repeated threats of attacks by Israel and by the United States. And if you watch or listen to the speeches that are made by, for instance, Vice US President Mike Pence or Nikki Haley, you see that these theatrical expressions of hatred towards Iran would make you feel, to say nothing of Mr. Netanyahu and his theatrical performance at Munich Security Conference. So Iran is, of course, concerned about possible attacks. And so it says, I need to improve my military, and that's what the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has ordered to do.
Okay, let's ask James Phillips. James Phillips, is that fair that Nikki Haley and Mike Pence and Benjamin Netanyahu are making theatrical threats against Iran, and any reasonable country would take precautions in the face of those threats?
I don't recall them chanting death to Iran or death to the Iranian regime. You know, the scale of what they're saying is eclipsed by some of the rhetoric coming out of Tehran. I agree that Syria is beyond the scope of this kind of agreement. And although, you know, the missiles were outside the scope of the JCPOA, it is a long-standing, you know, proliferation criteria that one of the elements of a nuclear program are the means to deliver it. And Iran has developed, second only to Israel in the Middle East, a ballistic missile force that does not make sense on a medium-range basis, because those missiles are right now are armed with conventional weapons that are illogical in military terms, which indicate they have plans for a nuclear follow-on. And that's one reason why many argue that the ballistic missile tests are a violation of the spirit of the deal, because it shows Iran is still making progress on the delivery system. So I don't think that's too much to ask. You know, it would probably be a separate type agreement, and I actually personally think there's little chance of it being negotiated. But if there is no follow-on agreement, then I think it is almost certain that President Trump will reimpose sanctions. And once that happens, even if Iran and the Europeans and Russia and China decide to stay within the JCPOA, that the agreement itself will end up being null and void.
Right. Mehrdad Khonsari, if that happens, Iranian President Rouhani has said, he's warned that the West will come to regret the day the nuclear agreement collapses, blaming the US for sabotaging the deal, as he says. What do you think he means by that?
Well, it's, you know, I think, I don't know exactly what he means, but I think it will be a very regretful event from any standpoint. The point is that Iran is entitled to having a legitimate defense force. Forget about carrying nuclear warheads, short of carrying nuclear warheads. What is Iran supposed to do to defend itself against, let's say, a country like Saudi Arabia or even the UAE with a superior air force that can destroy the Iranian air force in half a day? They have absolutely no weapons to defend themselves. Now, the Saudis have similar missiles on the other side. We don't hear anything being said about it. Now, the part that our American friend said about the Iranian rhetoric, I believe he's correct in that. I think that the Iranian regime has over the years inherited a set of slogans which it cannot use and it cannot dispose, which it must reject, because it's counter to Iranian national interest to pursue these kind of ridiculous statements. And the relationship, this relationship that it has created with Israel is certainly wrong, for have created Iran's most natural ally in the Middle East to turn it into working with its most natural enemies against Iranian interests. Well, that also needs to be looked at. But the Americans cannot punish Iran for the government that they have, while at the same time they punish the people of Yemen for the government that they don't have, which is sitting in Riyadh, and prolonging the misery of the Syrian people because they're not happy about the outcome of the Syrian civil war. Now, these are the issues that are at stake, and certainly further negotiation is required to create a different atmosphere, but that does not need to happen by negating what they have signed. If President Trump doesn't like what President Obama signed, that's not the fault of the Iranian government or the other signatories. So they cannot turn a domestic political issue and rivalry into breaking internationally recognized agreements, which has been ratified by the Security Council as well.
Right. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, I would love to go on, but unfortunately, I've got to move on. One of the things I wanted to ask about, I don't have time to ask about, is, how on earth does Trump get the North Koreans to the table and get them to agree on anything if he tears up this deal?
Absolutely.
But that for another time. For the moment, I thank you all. James Phillips, Massoumeh Torfeh, and Mehrdad Khonsari, thank you for joining us on the Newsmakers.